Hey guys, it's me again. Today we're gonna read chapter 5 of our book, My Survival, A Girl on Schindler's List. I hope you were able to watch the video for chapter 4, and if you remember what happened in chapter 4, Rena and her family got moved to the Krakow ghetto, which probably isn't a very good place. That's where they take the Jews and ship them off to the various concentration camps. So, today we're going to be reading chapter 5, and it is called 1942, Liquidation of the Krakow Ghetto. So, the word liquidation, may or may not have heard it before, but I'm not going to tell you what it means. We're going to read the chapter, and then I want you to think about what that word liquidation means. All right, here we go. We saw death every day in the Krakow ghetto. My father had a good friend named Rudy. They used to play cards together. One day, my father came home with an ashen face. He told us that he and Rudy had been standing in front of the ghetto hospital when a German officer walked by, fired his gun, and killed Rudy. The German had no reason to shoot Rudy other than because he was a Jew. On December 31st, 1942, German soldiers burst into our apartment and arrested my father. It no longer mattered that my father had a work permit. It no longer mattered that he was a good person who never did anything wrong. The Germans decided the time had come for him to die. Imagine being 13 years old and seeing your father marched away to be murdered. Later, I found out the reason my father had been arrested. There was another Jew in the ghetto who was jealous of my father's popularity and had lied to the police that my father was active in the underground. The Underground was a secret organization of young men and women who fought the Germans by stealing their weapons, blowing up Nazi offices, and enlisting others to resist the German occupation of Poland. In the Krakow ghetto, there was such an underground group of young resistors, but my father never had anything to do with them. My mother and I were frantic and looked for someone who could get my father released, but we had no luck. The Germans kept him in the ghetto jail for 1 week and then put him on transport to Auschwitz. In my eyes, my father was the smartest and strongest man in the world, and I was sure nothing would happen to him. Somehow, I told myself, he would figure out how to survive. Those were the hopes of a naive 13-year-old. What I did know about Auschwitz or the horrors that happened there. The day the Germans deported my father was the day I saw him for the last time. In the beginning, before the Germans decided to liquidate, meaning shut down, the Krakow ghetto, few people knew where the transports were going. The Germans lied that the trains took Jews to farms where they grew food for the German army, and many Jews in the ghetto forced themselves to believe this was all true. After all, who wanted to think their family members were being sent away to be killed? But then the German government started sending made-up postcards to people in the ghetto that read, "Sorry to inform you that this or that person from your family has died of natural causes." For a while, the Germans even sent boxes of ashes with a note, "Here are the remains of your loved one." Then we heard that the Krakow ghetto was to be liquidated, and even the most hopeful Jews understood the truth. No one was being sent away to work on a farm. They were being sent away to die. The only Jews allowed to live were those whom the Germans deemed fit for work, meaning between the ages of 12 and 55. My mother's parents were nearly 70 years old. To save them from the transports, my mother and her younger sister brought their parents out into the courtyard of our building and told them to hide under a pile of leaves. My grandparents told me to hide with them. I wasn't sure why, because I was 13 and allowed to stay in the ghetto, but I did what they asked me to do. My grandparents and I stretched out on our stomachs and crawled under a pile of leaves and dirt. "Stay still and quiet," my mother whispered to us. Then she and my aunt left to go to their work. From under the pile of dirt, I felt the ground shake as trucks carrying soldiers rolled through the ghetto. A few minutes later, I heard soldiers marching into our building and going door to door, rounding up any old people they found hiding. Just to make their elderly Jewish prisoners more miserable, The soldiers took chairs and tables from their apartments and threw them out the window. Furniture crashed on the courtyard ground. Then the soldiers marched their prisoners down the stairs, out through the gates of the courtyard, and lined them against a brick wall. We heard shots and people screaming. After a while, it became quiet. Some hours later, my mother returned from work. "You can come out now," she said. "Everybody is gone." My grandparents and I stood up and brushed the leaves off our clothes. Just when we thought my grandparents were safe, something terrible happened. 2 German soldiers, making a final inspection of the ghetto, walked into the courtyard. Seeing the dirt and leaves in my grandparents' hair, it was obvious they had been hiding. My grandmother bent down and whispered to me, "We'll be okay." She took my grandfather's hand, and the soldiers marched them away. I will never forget the expression on my mother's face watching her parents walking away to be murdered. It was horrible. We went back to our apartment and did our best to repair the damage done by the soldiers, but some destruction can't be repaired. The liquidation of the Krakow ghetto continued. For 4 days, German soldiers went door to door, rounding up Jews. In those 4 days, 2,000 men, women, and children were sent to the Plazau concentration camp 2 miles away. 3,000 were sent to be murdered in Auschwitz, and 2,000 more were killed on the spot. The Germans gathered all the other Jews, those who possessed work permits, and told them they would be relocated to Plazau. Many of the ghetto workshops had already been relocated there, including the printing shop where my mother and I had been assigned. We assembled by the gates of the ghetto and set out on the forced march to Plazau concentration camp. All right, that is the end of chapter 5. So, liquidation, as you may have figured it out from reading the chapter, it means kind of a clearing out. Some people use the liquidation as a word for clearance. Maybe you see it in a store that's closing, like liquidation sale. That means basically a clearing out. So they were clearing out the Krakow ghetto and sending all the Jews to concentration camps, or like it said, killing them on the spot, which is super, super sad, but that is actually what happened. So I will keep doing these short videos so you guys can, if you would like to listen to the story, chapter 6 is probably about the same length as chapter 5. So I will do another video for chapter 6. I hope you're enjoying the story. I miss you all.